When I was invited for coffee by a colleague who was leaving, I had no idea that this conversation would uncover a shocking secret about the company's benefits policy. I've always supported flexibility for parents, but what I heard that day about the stark difference between employees with children and those without left me stunned. And then, the biggest question popped into my mind. What should I do with this information now that I know too much? When I received an invitation for coffee from a colleague who was leaving the organization, I thought it was just a simple farewell. As someone who tends to keep things low-key and doesn't like to make a fuss, I didn't imagine that this meeting would completely change the way I viewed the company and everything I thought was fair. As we sat down, starting with light talk about work and shared memories, she suddenly shifted to a much heavier topic. I feel like there's something wrong here, and before I leave, I want you to know about something I think is incredibly unfair. She paused for a moment, as if thinking whether she should continue, and then she said something that shocked me. Did you know that this company has a special policy for people with children? A benefits package just for them? I was taken aback, unable to believe what I had just heard. She went on to tell me about a benefits package I had never heard of before, one that was exclusively for employees with children, called Family Benefits. The name sounded simple enough, but what was included in it made me sit back and try to process what she was saying. This package wasn't disclosed anywhere in any official documents I had ever seen, such as the employee handbook or our payroll sheets. This only made me more confused. According to her, when employees with children join the company, they're informed about this special package, which includes several extraordinary benefits. For instance, they get an additional 10 days off every year, 3 sick days, 2 personal days, and 5 vacation days. This meant they could take time off with ease, far more than the rest of us, the childless employees. But it didn't stop there. There were a number of other perks that were simply unbelievable. For example, the company offers free gym memberships and swimming lessons for the entire family of those with children. I, on the other hand, only get a 50% discount, and my spouse isn't eligible for any discount at all. And while we are officially a 1 remote day per week organization, employees with children are allowed to work remotely whenever schools are closed, meaning they don't have to come into the office during the summer, and even parents with children who aren't school age yet get this privilege. Then there were the weekend and evening events we volunteered for, where volunteering gives you compensatory time. If a parent had to call out of an event due to childcare issues, they still got their comp time. If the event was family-focused, parents were exempt from volunteering altogether and could bring their families as guests while still receiving comp time for the event. I could hardly believe it as I listened. The company even had discounts on major businesses, not just for child-related services, but for movie theaters, ride-sharing apps, and chain stores. These discounts weren't available to employees without children. I felt stunned and somewhat angry as I realized how these benefits were kept secret and not shared with the child-free employees. She explained that to avoid tension and comparisons, the company asked everyone who received these benefits to keep quiet about them. But the real reason, I quickly understood, was that the company didn't want the childless employees to find out about the obvious disparity. At that moment, I started to feel like an outsider, not just because of the material benefits, but because of the sheer lack of transparency in the company's policies. The fact that these benefits were not acknowledged openly made me feel uncomfortable. The resentment and curiosity about this policy began to grow within me, and I couldn't help but wonder whether these benefits were truly fair and just. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had heard. The frustration built up day by day, and I began to notice the little things in the office that I had never paid attention to before. Those with children frequently took time off. Remote work seemed like a given during the summer, while we, the childless employees, had to follow stricter rules. What I thought was flexibility in the company now felt like clear discrimination. I started to realize that it wasn't just a few small perks, but this policy had created a very distinct divide between employees with children and those without. Looking at my colleagues with kids, It felt like they always had some kind of privilege, whether it was more vacation days, the ability to work remotely when schools were closed, or being exempt from volunteering for child-focused events. Meanwhile, those of us without children had no such benefits, and we were still expected to attend every event, even when we had personal commitments. What struck me the most was that all of our bosses and managers had kids. This wasn't a coincidence. I realized that they were the ones benefiting the most from these perks. It wasn't just about extra days off. It was the way work was structured and how events were organized, always with a preference for parents. There were meetings where I noticed many of my colleagues with kids were conspicuously absent, especially during the summer. I hadn't thought much of it until I heard my colleague's story. I had never imagined that there would be such a stark divide in the company. I always thought that family-friendly policies were just part of the company's flexibility, aimed at accommodating employees. But now I understood that it wasn't just flexibility. It was a benefits system designed specifically for one group, and that system was kept secret, known only to those with children. I tried to learn more about this, asking a few colleagues with kids, but they all responded evasively, saying that these benefits weren't for everyone to share. This only made me more upset. If these perks were legitimate, why not make them public so everyone could know about them and decide whether or not to join in? Why keep it a secret? This feeling of discomfort kept growing inside me, day by day. I couldn't just ignore it, seeing the clear injustice that was unfolding. It felt like everything was happening behind our backs, those of us without children, and we had no idea until the truth came out. But I also knew one thing for sure. If no one spoke up, this issue would remain a secret within the company forever. As each day passed, my frustration grew. I started to notice every little detail in the company that I had never paid attention to before. Colleagues with children were always treated differently. They could take more time off, work remotely all summer, while we, the childless employees, had to adhere to stricter work rules. This only made me more uncomfortable, but I knew I couldn't stay silent and continue working as usual. One day, while talking with a fellow childless colleague, I decided to share what I had discovered. They were just as shocked and angry as I was. It was clear that this wasn't just about the benefits we and other childless colleagues were missing out on, but also about the inherent unfairness of the company's policies. After talking it through, we decided that we needed to take action. We couldn't continue living in this ignorance and inequality. We began discussing how to address the issue. At first, I thought about just speaking privately with HR to clarify the situation, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wouldn't be enough. We couldn't let this injustice remain in private conversations. We decided to send an email to HR and the management team, asking them to explain the differences in benefits and clarify why they had been kept so secret. After some discussion, 2 other colleagues and I drafted the email. We didn't just want an explanation. We wanted the company to acknowledge the disparity and come up with fairer solutions for all employees, regardless of whether they had children. We knew this could stir up some trouble in the company, but we couldn't just stand by and endure this injustice anymore. The next day, we sent the email. The message was clear. We had discovered the difference in benefits between employees with children and those without, and we demanded an explanation from HR and management. If there was no change, we made it clear that we would not hesitate to expose the issue to the entire company and even consult a lawyer if necessary. We received a very quick response from HR. They stated that they would look into the matter. To my surprise, after sending the email, things in the company seemed to become more tense than ever. Emergency meetings between directors, senior managers, and HR started taking place. I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt like I had stepped into a bigger battle than I had anticipated. Would the company change, or would we face consequences for exposing the truth? A mix of anxiety and anticipation filled me, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back and stay silent any longer. Just one day after we sent the email, everything in the company seemed to change. I couldn't help but feel a tense atmosphere hanging over everything. There were constant meetings between directors, senior managers, and HR, all trying to control the flow of information. Still, I hadn't received any formal explanation about the family benefits and the clear discrimination that existed. This left me feeling even more confused and uneasy than before. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from a friend in HR. She said there was an urgent meeting scheduled for the next morning and asked me to attend. I knew that this meeting could be crucial in determining how the company would handle the situation. My heart raced as I realized this was the moment that could change everything, or nothing at all. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a tight knot in my stomach. The meeting began with the presence of directors, HR, and a few other leaders. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. One of the senior directors started speaking. "We've received your email and we're reviewing every aspect of this matter. However, we cannot agree with your claim that we have discriminated." My anxiety grew as I realized that the company was not willing to take responsibility for what had happened. They only spoke of the changing needs of the organization without ever addressing the clear disparity they had created between employee groups. Their reasoning didn't satisfy me. I felt like we were being treated as unreasonable complainers, when in fact, we were just asking for fairness. After several rounds of debate, one of the directors bluntly said, "We understand there is dissatisfaction within the company, but we want to maintain a harmonious work environment, and these benefits were implemented to support families with children." This response only fueled my frustration. They weren't even acknowledging that the differentiation between employees with children and those without was inherently unfair. Instead, they seemed to believe these policies were perfectly justified for families. In the end, after the meeting concluded, I felt like I had done everything I could, but the results were far from what I had hoped for. The company held firm in its stance, and everything seemed to be framed under the guise of necessary changes. But the sense of disappointment couldn't extinguish my belief. I had decided not to back down and to continue fighting, not just for myself, but for my colleagues who also deserved to be treated fairly. I knew that, regardless of how this battle turned out, at least I had done what I could to expose the truth, and I wasn't the only one who felt this injustice. After that tense meeting, I couldn't help but feel that everything in the company was starting to change. From the awkward silences between colleagues to informal discussions in the office, it was clear that the atmosphere had grown much heavier. But what concerned me the most was the silence from the higher-ups and the directors. They seemed steadfast in their position, unwilling to change anything. A week later, I realized I couldn't just sit and wait anymore. I knew that simply reporting the issue via email and having a meeting wasn't enough to resolve this. It wasn't because I was impatient, but because I understood that this issue wasn't just personal. It affected all the childless colleagues in the company. I needed to do something more powerful to create change. I began researching my rights, not only within the company, but also legally. While gathering information, I reached out to a friend who was a labor attorney. She helped me understand what rights my colleagues and I could be entitled to. The anxiety started to ease as I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. One morning, while I was at the office, I received a message from one of my childless colleagues. She informed me that another meeting was scheduled, and this time, the discussion would be extended to the whole company. The news made me uneasy, as it was a clear indication that this battle was entering a crucial phase. The meeting was held in a large conference room, with leaders, directors, and representatives from all departments in attendance. Everyone sat in silence. The tension in the room was palpable. I realized that whether I liked it or not, this wasn't just a small issue anymore. It had become something much bigger, potentially changing the way the company operated in the future. When the meeting began, the HR director stood up and announced that the company would review some of the benefits and policies. However, her tone wasn't confident, and I could sense the awkwardness in her words. These remarks seemed more like a temporary attempt to smooth things over, but I couldn't be satisfied with them. In my mind, I had already decided that if the company didn't implement concrete and fair changes, I couldn't continue working here. As the meeting ended, I felt a great sense of disappointment. The directors still hadn't changed their stance, and the only things they offered were minor adjustments that did nothing to address the root of the issue. I knew I had reached a critical turning point, and my final decision would not only affect me but also all of the colleagues who shared this sense of injustice. The silence and evasiveness of the higher-ups only fueled my determination, not just to seek fairness for myself, but to fight for the rights of my childless colleagues as well.